For thousands of years, the Israelites have been exiled from their homeland. Until 1948, God's predictions concerning Israel are happening now.
We have seen some news emerge that's just unbelievable. Lebanon has fired on Israel. We actually think that it is a less experienced organization than Hezbollah. Israel is still doing the due diligence to understand where it's coming from and where it came from, and that's kind of a side note here. But you have the international community that is frowning upon Israel for actually taking a stand in wanting to do the right thing in defending her nation. They are beginning to and trying to actively rewrite history with respect to what has happened in Israel. This is something that they are good at doing, and it's something that they've been doing for quite some time. And quite frankly, their father, the devil, has helped them do it quite well. But the truth of the matter is, when people try to rewrite history, there are always going to be a remnant of individuals who can tell you what the real history of the nation of Israel is. And I think that it's appropriate, before we get into the media nonsense that's happening with Israel, that we get into a conversation, a portion of a conversation that I saw between Bibi Netanyahu and Jordan Peterson. Now, I think this is important. Bibi Netanyahu, in one of the most articulate ways I've heard him do it in a very long time, and he's very good at doing this with this particular subject, describes to us how they have tried to rewrite history, or how they have tried to rewrite the history of the nation of Israel. There is a sleeping giant that's being awoken, and we need to be aware of it, because the geopolitics in the region of the Middle East are about to change, and they're going to change dramatically, folks. They have already had a series of changes, but we are going to see it get even more crazy shortly. So let's pay attention to what Bibi Netanyahu says, because, folks, I'm just telling you this right now. The message being communicated by him right now is powerful and effective, and a lot of people do not want to hear this. People who are anti-Israel and people who are anti-God have no desire to see these principles being communicated, because these principles are true and the power of what's being communicated is significant. So let's listen to what Bibi has to say, because this is an important one.
The Mamluks, the Ottomans, ultimately the British, a series of conquerors. In other words, they took over the land, lost the land, and did nothing with the land. So if they had done what you say, if they had created, if that house that we were expelled from was taken over by another people, another family, they built a family there. They had children, grandchildren. They extended the porch. They built a parking garage, and so on. It's gone. What can you do? You still have the ability to demand reclamations, compensation, and so on. But tough luck. That happens in history. But that's not what happened. Once the Jews were conquered by the Arabs did nothing with it, lost the land to others. Now we come back and bring it back to life 13 centuries later and perform this miracle, and they fabricate a history where we were there all the time. It was a verdant homeland. It was built up. It was nothing of the kind. It was desert. It was nothing. Now, it's not merely Mark Twain and Arthur Penryn Stanley who say.
By the way, he's not lying about that. Okay, understand, none of what he's saying is incorrect.
Now, it's not merely Mark Twain and Arthur Penryn Stanley who say that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of travelogues over the centuries of famous French poets, of Swiss travelers, of German theologians, everybody, of poets, writers, travelers, who describe exactly the same thing. There was nothing there. There was no Palestinian state. There were no Palestinians. They didn't even, the Arabs even didn't call themselves that. They were calling themselves parts of southern Syria.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to say this, and he's right about this. Arabs were never, we say Arabs, the Arabs were never ever calling themselves Palestinians. Do you understand the fact that the name Palestinian was a name that was given by one of the later Roman emperors to Jews as a way of demeaning them? He referred to them by their enemies, which is why he called them Palestina. That's why he said, that's where the name Palestinian comes from. So even the name Palestinian originally refers to a Jew. People don't know that because they don't study history. And when they do study history, they study the wrong history.
There was no national consciousness. There was nothing to form the consciousness about. In the 20th century, the Arab world and the Palestinians and their supporters in the West, among the intellectual elites, basically erased history and recreated a fake history.
They erased history and created a new history, a fake history. That's what the devil does. He is a liar, and he is the father of lies.
basically erased history and recreated a fake history that deracinates the Jewish roots that are unparalleled. There is no other story in the history of nations where people fought for so long for their land, for 2,000 years, were dispossessed from it, came back to it, did not kick out an existing population with a national consciousness, rebuilt the land, and now are being told you have no connections to it. You were, you're the colonials. No, we're not. We're not just to give this, just to give us a fine point, because this is so crucial what we're discussing. And I discuss it at considerable length in my book because people are so ignorant of history. We are not the Belgians in the Congo.
Wow. We are not the Belgians in the Congo. If you don't know that reference, look it up. It's a powerful reference. Let's take a listen to what he continues to say.
Not the Dutch in Indonesia, okay? We're not the British in South Africa. We had been there all the time. We had been in the Congo. We had been, if you will, the equivalent in Indonesia. We were kicked out of the Congo and nothing happened in the Congo. Nothing. No other people there, no development, nothing. Okay? Now we come back to our land, build it up, enable immigration from of Arabs, who are now called Palestinians, from neighboring lands, and they tell us, oh, you don't belong here. You dispossessed us.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to say this because this is really important. When he brings up, like, for example, the colonization by Great Britain of many areas in Africa, understand this. This is very, very important. When they came and did what they did, they came and they improved things. They changed things. That's not what happened here. You guys get that? That's not what took place here. Bibi is trying to explain that. It's not what the world says it is. They came and they did nothing except poop all over it. I think that's important. I think that context is an important context to be able to establish and be aware of. Look what he goes on to say.
Palestinians from neighboring lands, and they tell us, oh, you don't belong here. You dispossessed us. This is essentially what Arab propaganda and Palestinian propaganda has done. And what I labored not only in the present book, my own history, Bibi, my story, but in a previous book, A Place Among the Nations, to debunk. And you know what? The interesting thing is this, so far, it's quite amazing. No fact that I put forward in any of these books has ever been challenged.
Yeah.
Not one.
Yep. He's right about that, folks. He's absolutely right. No fact that he has put in those books have ever been challenged. You want to know why? Because his history is accurate. This is unbelievable. Coming out of the mouth of the prime minister, it's pretty powerful when you hear it. Here it is.
Herzl was what I call our modern Moses, but I'd actually start with the original Moses. The Jewish people have lived in the land of Israel, what is now the state of Israel, have lived here and have been attached to this place for about 3,500 years, 3.5 millennia. Now, for the first 2 millennia, roughly, of that time, we were living in what is described in a text commonly known as the Bible. So the Bible describes how the Jewish people lived on this land, were attached to this land, fought off conquerors, sometimes were conquered, but stayed on their land. And that continued for a very long time until roughly the 7th century, actually, after the birth of Christ, okay? For roughly 2,000 years. We were conquered by the Romans, we were conquered by the Byzantines. They did a lot of bad things to us, but they didn't really exile us, contrary to what people think, okay? The loss of our land actually occurred when the Arab conquest took place in the 7th century. The Arabs burst out from Arabia, and they did something that no other conqueror, not the Romans, not the Byzantines, not the Greeks before them, not Alexander the Great, nobody did before. They actually started taking over the land of the Jewish farmer. They brought in military colonies that took over the land. And gradually, over the next 2 centuries, the Jews became a minority in our land. So it is under the Arab conquest that the Jews lost their homeland. The Arabs were the colonials. The Jews were the natives dispossessed.
By the way, I just want to say this. When he talks about the Arabs being the colonials, this is a very, very important point. A lot of people don't recognize this. When we talk about the greatest propagators of slavery, today. They're the same ones that did it back in the day when slavery was legal in the United States of America. It is the Arab Muslim. People don't recognize that. It's the Arab Muslim. People don't understand it. And I can tell you this right now, the Arab Muslims also support a whole lot of other evil things. Muhammad was a child exploiter. That sounds like a harsh, offensive thing to say, but we know that to be true. So when he talks about the Arabs doing what they did, think about what he is saying. It's founded in truth. Everybody stipulates to what he's saying. Nobody is debating it.
Well, that happens in history. The Jews were dispossessed. We were flung to the far corners of the earth, suffered unimaginable suffering because we had no homeland. But we didn't disappear, and we never gave up the dream of coming back to our ancestral homeland. So generation after generation, the Jews could be in Warsaw, they could be in Yemen, they could be in China. And they said, next year in Jerusalem, we'll come back next year in Jerusalem. Well, that was made possible because the Arabs who had conquered the land basically left it barren. They never made it their own. It was a barren land. It really had, practically it was an empty land. And in the 19th century, the idea of coming back next year in Jerusalem became a reality. By the way, in part because of Christian Zionist support for the idea of the Great Return. The Jews came back in the 19th century to the land of Israel. The result of this return was that we started building farms, factories, places of employment. Arabs from nearby countries started immigrating, and they call themselves Palestinians. They reconstructed history and said, we've been here for centuries. No, they haven't. They weren't there at all, and they didn't have a national consciousness. We came back, made it our land, and we said, okay, we now will live together. We decided to establish a state in 1948, that's 75 years ago, and we said, everybody can live here. The Arabs said, there can't be a Jewish state. You have no right to be here. It's our land. It's not your land. It's been our land for 3,500 years. If you took over somebody's apartment, knocked them out, dispossessed them, and they never gave up the claim, they said it's our claim, and you left this barren dump, okay? And the families, the progeny of the people you kicked out, came back, rebuilt the house. You cannot come back and tell them, you don't belong here, we're gonna kick you out. Especially since you're latecomers who've come to live in part of the house, which is what the so-called Palestinians are, okay? We say to them, you can live here, we can live here, but it's our land, it's our state.
Why is that such a hard thing for people to understand? God made the declaration. Look, this is what's happening. People are going to keep poking and poking and poking and poking and poking, and eventually Israel is going to wake up. They're beginning to. The sleeping giant is about to wake up, and when he does, he's going to unleash. Look what he continues to say.
And the reason this conflict continues is because the Palestinians, who represent the colonial powers, the Arab conquest of the Middle East and beyond, they're saying, you have no right for a Jewish state. Well, we do. If any people has any right to a state, if any people never gave up their dreams of returning to their ancestral home, if any people rebuilt their home from nothing, from barren, wasted land, it's the Jewish people. To tell them, you have suffered more than anyone else. You have never lost your dream of coming back and rebuilding your national life in your ancestral homeland. You have no right to be there. But the Arabs who are trying to destroy you, they have that right. That is a complete perversion of history and also a complete perversion of justice. The Jews belong to this land. This land belongs to the Jews. The Palestinians are free to live here next to us, among us, but they're not free to demand the dissolution of the Jewish state. That is not justice. That is injustice.
I could not agree with the man more. I just think that there is a level of brilliance, not only in his communication skills, but in the very facts that he continues to be telling us. Everything that he is saying is based on truth, folks. Mark my words when I say this, folks. The sleeping giant that is Israel is awakening. And when Israel awakes, I can just promise you this, it's not going to be pretty for her enemies. Even when the enemies of Ezekiel 38 attack Israel and Israel has no ability to be able to defend itself, we know that God will defend Israel. I think it's time to wake up. Look at what's going on right now in the world around us. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. Look at what's taking place in Western and Eastern Europe. Look at what's taking place in the United States of America. Look everywhere. We see evidence everywhere that Christ could come at any moment.